folks. This is Herb Stevenson. This is the Natural Passages, Revealing the Unmarked Doors of Life.
And Ken Chapin here,
Ken's
joining in
come
a
back.
conversation.
Yep, Ken's come back for us to continue our lively conversations. So Ken's brought up a suggestion of wanting to talk about the drama triangle and as a situation, especially what's going on in today's environment. So uh, let's see where this goes. Okay. You want to say a little bit about your perception about the victim, rescuer, persecutor triangle? Because that's really what the
Uh,
drama triangle is.
Yeah, so I don't remember who it is that it sort of came up with this framework originally, but I know that people have been working with it for a long time. Um, I would just start out by saying that um, the idea of the drama triangle. My understanding of the drama triangle is that there's an unconscious and a conscious expression of call them roles or ways of being that we all sort of possess and sort of exhibit in our lives. And one is the victim. These are the unconscious expressions. So there's the victim, there's the rescuer, the hero, or the bully persecutor.
Mhm.
And uh, those being the unconscious expressions, there's a counterpart, which is a more conscious expression of those energies where the victim becomes the creator, the hero or the rescuer becomes the coach, and the bully becomes the challenger.
Right.
And um, I think it's an important distinction to be able to move between the unconscious and the conscious expressions of, I'll just call those archetypes. And
Okay. Well, let me add a little bit so people have a little bit more color. Steve Cartman um, came up with the drama triangle um, years ago, probably 1970s. Came out of transactional analysis, which Eric Byrne had done. And he was out of transactional analysis. He started paying attention to what became, as you said, the archetypes. So let's start off with that first side where it's persecutor, rescuer, and victim. And I want to apply it to, because what you pointed out, it's a lack of conscious awareness that gets us in trouble with these because we go into basically storytelling if we're a persecutor, a rescuer, and a victim. And so let's just see where this goes. And part of the issue also is really interesting. The drama triangle is we have all three parts. So if I'm feeling victimized and because somebody is persecuting or bullying me, and I have another person who suddenly starts trying to rescue me, it's very common for the victim to become the bully. Uh, you know, I may be over here being a victim, but you're not supposed to acknowledge it. And I sure as hell don't need you to save me.
right,
Yeah. So the critical piece for me about this is, um, and it has been, I think you alluded to it. The unconscious, what triggers it is usually some kind of fear or anxiety um, in a situation which compels us to do something. So if I'm a bully and persecutor, there's something I really want, and I may not like you. If I'm a rescuer, I'm one of those who wants to take care of people, save them. I'm a savior. And then if I'm a victim, I'm basically saying is I have no power, at least under that archetypal information or direction. So where's that? What's that stimulating you?
yeah. Well, the word power is a big part of that. And the way that I've come to understand this dynamic is that, um, I think that there's some messages being sent back and forth, between these archetypes. And I think one way that I've come to understand it is the conversation is about power. And it is the the victim, let's say, has is getting the message from the bully that you either have no power or your power is insufficient, and the rescuer comes along and sort of adds some power to that. And as soon as the original bully is gone, as you had mentioned, the victim turns into the bully because now the person who was saying you have no power is vanquished. The next worst message is your power is not enough without me, which I think leads to a feeling of dependence or weakness, which I think is part of the reason, we're all wanting to claim and establish our own sense of personal power. And any experience or a message that tells us that we don't have it or it's insufficient is unwanted. And I
Let,
think that's how
let
I
me,
understand that.
yeah, let me interrupt you there because one of the things is coming back to what we're working on. From my perspective, all three of those, the individual lacks presence.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So what ends up happening is they are following what we in society is the illusion of power. And it's basically saying is if I have the illusion of no power or I have the illusion I must take power, we're using power actually as force. Energetically, we're forcing upon ourselves or we are withdrawing from ourselves. And so the impact of that is we are not able to witness ourselves because that ties back to what you said is the flip of this is to be consciously aware is what struggles most people struggle with. And this is really going on right now in society, much more so. Uh, I've worked with clients with this in the past and helped them see the dynamic. But the issue that I had to teach or had to support them is they needed to be able to witness themselves to realize, okay, I'm sliding into my persecutor role. And or my team has permission to say, are you aware you're sliding into trying to be forceful and bullying?
Uh-huh.
That creates a certain level of vulnerability and awareness, but it's really important because if we can't name it, it becomes an undiscussable.
Sure.
Undiscussable means we will play this process out as persecutor, rescuer, and victim. And it was interesting. I had an executive team that I worked with years ago that played this on a constant basis between each other. They rotated who's going to do what to whom today.
Right.
And helping them understand that and actually put the drama triangle on there diminished it because what we were trying to teach or I was trying to teach was how do I witness myself and not fall into unconscious storytelling.
Uh-huh.
And this is the hard part about this is people at first don't want to acknowledge that they're doing it.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
Yeah. And so the way I've approached that to support people is this, I want to share something with you. I'm experiencing you as being extremely forceful.
Mhm.
So do you have passion behind this or do you have a story going on? And they look at me and say, yeah, well, I really believe this. I think this is the right answer. And I said, well, in the process of doing that, you realize you're shoving it down everybody's throat. And if we don't agree with you, you blame us or something wrong with us.
Good point.
And when they begin to unravel that, that shifts things because the whole issue still comes down to tied what you said at the beginning. Are we consciously aware and going to use our dynamics in a positive fashion? Or are we going to do it in an unconscious fashion, which is usually where you get dysfunctional organizations and teams?
Mhm. I remember you were so when I share this with folks, everybody says I'm not a victim. There's a clear rejection of that. Nobody wants to see themselves as a bully either, and likely don't see the sort of subtle expressions of that behavior. Um, they look for big examples of bully and say, I'm not that, because that's bad. Nobody likes to be, to claim their victim. So there's usually a rejection of that. And there's this draw towards being heroic because we celebrate that as virtuous. Um, and the hero thing or the rescuer is seen, like I said, as being virtuous, and people like seeing themselves as that. And they don't, what doesn't seem to come, what doesn't get accounted for is the downside of that behavior. Um,
So that's why one of the things that you might consider when you're working with this, because if I give it a label and say, you're bullying, and you heard me just say this a minute ago, is I try to be descriptive. So, are you realizing you're coming across as extremely forceful, demanding, blaming, which suggests to me you really care about this a lot.
yeah. Mhm.
When I change that, because that's usually what's happened, they've been telling the story all night as they come into the meeting or whatever it is, and they're completely focused on getting their way or convincing everybody that their way is the right way or that that person is a bad person because they didn't do something. Um, so trying to help them witness themselves by descriptive phrases.
Mhm.
But the minute you label somebody, they feel judged. You know, fuck you and the horse you rode in on.
Sure.
So
Mhm.
And so that's part of the issue of why the drama triangle continues is we're not able to reveal it because people are so enmeshed in it. It seems like they're lost in it. And so the process, I think one option is what you pointed out that David Emerald came up with was the idea of how do we switch those to a positive? And I think that's, you know, it's not just a positive, it's a shift in frame of reference. So I don't have to use my energy in a negative way or a forceful way. I can use it in a collaborative or witnessing way, which means we can join together to create something. Because from what I understand of David's theory, he calls it the TED empowerment roles, creator, challenger, coach, all are saying, I want to work with you.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter if you have a triangle of a creator, a challenger, and a coach, there is a capacity to witness themselves, to be fully present, not feel offended, not feeling judged, simply focusing on the dynamic that's happened to be more effective.
Mhm.
And so I always go back and forth between presence or use of energy because one of those two things will help ring a bell, so to speak, for people to begin to become aware. Um, and I'll pause there and have you reflect on whatever you'd like to.
Yeah. So I was thinking about an earlier episode that you did with Sadeo where he had taken on a new role at a new company.
Okay.
And I remember you guys were teasing apart his sort of early day, sort of during his onboarding experience. And you said something to the effect of, yeah, maybe they don't need fixing,
Right.
right? And this is, I think, where, in my personal experience, this is where the dark side of the hero shows up, right? Because I see something that I think needs fixing, and I jump in there to fix it, and I see myself as being heroic, but I can imagine that the people who I think need fixing feel as though they're being bullied.
But it's not only that, it can be even more than that. Part of it is there is an assumption that they're broke, so that is offensive. That's a judgment. Um, the other one is a misreading of the field, the energy field, um, and the circumstances of that situation. Um, they did not need uh, fixed or rescued in the sense of what he was wanting to do. It was working in a turnaround organization, and they were not as interested in hiring him to do, let's just say, OD work. They were interested in help us get the policies and procedures to support everybody so we can be successful.
Mhm.
and he was blindsided into he couldn't see it.
Right. Yeah.
And that shifted his whole frame of reference after I basically said is what if they're not broke? Broke at least in the way you think it is, or what if the solution you have isn't what they really need?
Yeah.
And so the premise that I use consistently with presence comes out of Gestalt theory is that you start off with the initial something. A person is not broke.
Mhm.
A person is a perfect reflection of their self-creation over a lifetime.
Mhm.
If they don't like that, then they have the right and the capacity to change it. And that's really the piece that's most important for us when we look at this is how do I support them to do something different, which my definition also of coaching is I'm you're not if I walk in and somebody wants me to fix somebody, I say, well, you got the wrong person.
Mhm.
I don't fix people, but I can support them to learn how to do something different. But don't that to go in with the assumption that there's something wrong um, is a disservice to that person.
Right.
And most people don't really understand that. That disservice is they are a creative adjustment of every one of their life experiences, which ends up creating this personality, this type, this way of being. And we don't know how the hell they got there.
Right.
So what I wanted to, when I work with them is I point out to them is okay, this is who we are today. What's working, what's not working, and what are we willing to try to do something different?
Mhm.
And if and when they get a clarity of that and realize, okay, this is working, this is where I'm struggling, and what am I willing to do to go there? What I often point out to them, I said is, if you're not sure, then what are some options, and then what are some obstacles? And generally speaking, they've never thought about it. They're the unconscious part that lead to the behavior.
Right.
And so obstacles are a critical piece. And I often have them. It most people are very visual. Put it on a piece of paper side by side. And here's my options. These are my obstacles. How do we turn an obstacle into an opportunity uh, to change?
Mhm.
And that's the interesting part. People get froze in their unconsciousness and they struggle.
He's good.
So
Um, it seems as though one of the more difficult parts of um, David's empowerment model is, and he's very explicit about this in his writing, where challenger tends to be the most challenging position to take or to practice because, in my own experience, it can feel uh, it can sometimes feel like I might be bullying, where the language and the message that would come from challenger sounds or maybe lands as though it's coming from the bully. Um,
part of
and
it has to do with is starting off. What I do because I do that, I use all three of these roles. I use creator, challenger, and coaching role, depending on the individual. If it's something they're not looking at, I will often phrase it as, have you considered this
right.
of a way of understanding how you're perceived? And at first that takes them back.
Mhm.
And then I throw in, especially on an individual basis, whether it's in a relationship or it's let's say, in an organization, perception is 90% of reality. So if you are perceived as this is factual. That's because that's how they're going to treat you. So if they perceive you as a bully, you're a bully. If you don't care, then you're even more a bully.
Right.
If you're really interested in growing, what would be some alternatives we could look at that would support you in a different way? And it's getting possibility thinking brought into this, but challenging. I've been accused of being too direct or too harsh, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I just kind of go pierce right into saying, well, what about this? And I have to be careful with it because then I can be perceived as the persecutor as well. And so your assessment is really correct. The challenger is the one is how do I challenge them in a way that they can understand and receive and want to do something?
Right.
And if I can't do all of those things, then you'll get pushback. And one of the fastest ways you'll find out is they'll um, uh, if you're if you're coaching them, they'll just end the relationship. I can give you an example. This happened years ago. Sometimes dealing with CEOs and getting a dedicated amount of time to sit down and actually work through some things is very difficult. And and I can tell when there's resistance when I'm there for an appointment and I sit there for 50 minutes of an hour appointment and they come out saying, "Well, I got tied up and um, we only got 10 minutes left, so let's bag it for the day." And instead of doing the usual, I challenge that. I said, I'm here. I got 10 minutes. You're going to pay for it either way. Do you want to take advantage of the 10 minutes or do you just want to blow it off? It's your choice. And I'm usually direct that way. And I give them the choice of what do you want to do, and they bring me in. But in that 10 minutes, you can actually find out, you can actually make a difference by challenging them. How, for example, a simple one would be is how are you managing time?
Mhm.
How are you managing what you don't particularly want to do? Means it's been clear coaching wasn't something you were really interested in. In this case, that's what it was. The impact, though, of it was in 5 minutes, um, first 5 minutes, I assessed from the assessments, basically told him what the core issues were that were causing difficulties. At least that was the reception of the assessments, and this was other people. He sat there for a couple of minutes after I laid it out, and he said, "So you're basically telling me if I do this, this, and this, that will completely change the dynamic of what I've created?" And I said, "Yeah, if you can practice it and literally live it, yes, you could do that." He thought about it again, and he said, "Done." And then from that point forward, we started moving forward.
Right.
So once you pierce or challenge in a way that they can personalize it, they'll
Mhm.
shift.
Right. Yeah. The so this I think is where that the understanding and the relationship and the agreements being made explicit is really helpful. And I also this is one of the things that you had shared with me a number of years ago, probably directly, uh, as a result of me reaching out for some support. And one of the things that that you did that was really helpful, supported me to be present in that moment, was to ask me what is that I wanted. Like, did I just want to vent, or did I want something specific? And the beauty of that question is that I wouldn't say that it forced me to be present in that moment, but there was a real incentive for me to get present in that moment, in order to answer that question. And I use that all the time, mostly to support myself, I think, because what happens or what can happen is, a friend calls me up, they've got an issue. Uh, my less than conscious, not fully present, heroic gene wants to help. And it feels like the early stages, I just want to be helpful. And what I don't necessarily recognize is that on their end, it could feel like rescuing, and there could be that subtle message, which is you're insufficient. Here's your power. Um, you need me in order for you to feel better. Um, and that hero thing, I don't, I think that the hero and the victim carry the most allure, are most widely celebrated. And the bully thing I think, comes in third place, but it is a slippery slope.
Sure.
on the hero and the victim. I mean, it's real slippery and it's really attractive because if I'm the hero, I can feel good about myself. Uh, and if I'm the victim, I get to avoid taking personal responsibility for my choices, my actions, and my life and blame something outside of myself for my current state. Um, I think those two are very, very appealing for those two reasons.
Well, they're very appealing because implicit to when I ask, "What do you want?" and they don't know, then I rephrase and saying, "What are you not getting?" It's a,
Hmm.
and they look at me, and for example, usually if there's a rescuer victim dynamic going on, is the rescuer tries to go in and save somebody, and then that person turns into a persecutor, and now they're the victim. And what I point out in all three circumstances, the way you're behaving suggests you care,
Mhm.
or you would just leave the area. Wouldn't participate in this dynamic. So you care about something, and it's not only do you care about something, you're generally not getting something you want. And what I would really pay attention to is what is that? And because on one side you can say, what do you want? But that's a different perspective of what am I not getting that I want?
Yeah.
And usually it takes a few sessions and they eventually say they have an insight.
Mhm.
And whatever that is helps them begin to understand themselves. And I said, so now that you know that, anytime you feel like you're stepping into one of these roles, ask yourself, am I getting what I want? And you generally will find out that it's just an old recording. It's not even relevant to now. And you can begin to sit down and say, okay, how do I switch over to these other roles, which is creator, challenger, coach?
Mhm.
But 90% of where we fall into the unconscious realm, you've heard me say this, is Memorex, which is, perfect recording of some story that we have told ourselves forever. And every time we start telling it off of that recording, we think it's real and we're not paying attention to in this very specific moment, there's something different than what happened in the past. And you can actually break it. I've had people get to the point where they could actually say, "Is it, this feels like we're going back into our drama triangle. Can we take a break?"
Absolutely.
And that shifts it.
Absolutely. Yeah, being able to name it in real time as a thing that's outside of me is really powerful. I mean, I gave David's book to my son. I think he's either 12 or 14 years old.
Well,
Um, I mean, I have sent him that book probably three or four times. Um, and one of the things that I sent that to him because one of the things that seemed to be lacking that I wanted to strengthen in our family was the ability to have a language that we all spoke where we could talk because one of the things that David makes the really clear distinction is between the drama and the dynamic. And the drama, you know, the drama is very appealing and you could be dealing with drama in perpetuity whereas if you're dealing with the dynamic, you can actually make some progress. So point being, I gave that book to my son because I wanted us to have a common language where we could discuss, because we were a split household.
sure,
So, hey, dad, mom took my computer, suddenly he needs it for homework, right?
sure,
And what he's asking is for me to step in, intervene, and rescue because he sees himself as the victim and his mom is the bully,
sure.
right? And it's very appealing. Uh, but in that moment, I was able to say, okay, well, what have you tried? Which is me practicing coaching him to step into a more creative way of being.
Sure.
Um, and that can be really hard to maintain that place because the victim is very clever. I mean, they're all clever, but the victim has a clever way of being where they know what the hero, what triggers the hero, right? Which are these persistent and maybe increasingly subtle expressions of I'm not powerful enough. Please step in and help me out. Um, and the first time that I get that invitation, I'm able to set and maintain that boundary and say, well, what have you tried? Because even saying, have you tried this is a form of rescue. I mean, I need to be able to
It
say,
can be. Sure.
yeah. I mean, if we're really drilling, when I really drill down into it, any solution that I offer my son in that situation can seem like a form of rescue because what I am not doing is I'm not saying, well, what have you tried? And then shut up.
Sure.
Um,
But that's part of the issue. It also ties back to when you're dealing with those circumstances because it's almost like these they're archetypal energies. I mean, they're universal, and every society has this kind of dynamic. So it's interesting that we all perpetuate this problem. Um, what I work with frequently when I'm in this kind of situation, I ask point blank, and they it's at first they think I'm not serious, and I say, are you really interested in changing? But and why would it called you in, or we wouldn't have you here if we didn't want change? And I said, well, that's not what I asked you. I want you to really think about it is, are you really interested in change? Because if you're attached to how you are behaving, you are attached to this perception of how to be effective, and you're not willing to expand that to something more positive or more effective, whatever phrase they're looking for. Um, I've had people say, "No, I'm really happy where I am." I mean, I literally, I think I may have said this in a prior podcast. I was asked to coach a CEO who had a very abrasive style, very command and control. The organization was concerned. Um, he ran their largest subsidiary and was being considered to take over the CEO of the holding company. If he changed, because the concern was he would alienate all the CEOs of the various subsidiaries. And after he went through the full assessment and his style, and he said, "Yeah, I agree. That's all true." And I said, "You're also aware that you're being considered for this job is going to require a different type of influence and collaboration. Are you interested in that?" And he said, "No, I'm not interested in that at all." He said, "I'm effective. Look at what I've done. Look at how I've done it. And if that's what they want." And he actually assumed he would not, um, they would not do anything, which was the opposite of what happened. They ended up hiring a CEO from somebody else to be over the holding company, and then and his irritation, he left. The board recognized that that was a possibility, but they also realized the collateral damage he was creating through the command and control process was too high. So some people won't change. I
all
mean,
because of the success formula, right?
right? Their success, internal success formula. And so the same thing happens with why this drama triangle works is in different circumstances, we are getting something that unfortunately feels good. So I'm happy being a victim. I'm happy being a rescuer. I'm happy being, and instead of saying is how do I honor human dignity by being fully present to myself and these people and saying, well, we try something else.
Mhm.
And it's almost like we're set up, everybody is set up to go through this in a way that hopefully we wake up.
Right. You
And
think I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
You think it's a search for relevance in some way? Because I got a buddy of mine that I shared all of this with because I worked with him, very closely, you know, and he was constantly complaining, but he was complaining about the rescuing that he was doing, which, you know, I find rather funny. But you know, we had this conversation, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm a rescuer, and I'm going to stay that way."
He likes,
And yeah, and my response was, "That's great. If you're consciously deciding that this is how you're going to be, then that's great. Just know that I'm not as interested in listening to the complaint. If you're going to keep this dynamic alive, then there's really no place for me in this other than listening to you complain, which I'm really not interested in doing." Um, but is that a like why? What would compel somebody to know that they're behaving in that way, and it's worth it to them just to maintain the status quo than to make that shift? Why would I do that?
the dynamic of the relationship could dictate it.
Mhm.
So if I do the rescuer thing, the other person doesn't become a persecutor.
So staying safe.
Staying safe. Oftentimes, if they're that adamant or clear about their role, that's why family dynamics don't change very easily. Is everybody has a role. It's an unspoken role, but you're this and you're that. Uh, you want to really create strange dynamics, then start changing it.
For sure.
And a lot of people, that's why they'll leave their families in a sense of create distance. The distance allows them to not fall into the energetic roles that each of them have created. And it's interesting watching family dynamics. Somebody who I'm aware of goes between being bullying, because let's just say they like to be in charge, but every once in a while that tough facade gets broken. They feel vulnerable and like something was done to them that made them come out of that, and they become a victim. And they want the other person to apologize and rescue and support them to get back into that place. And once they've got enough of that, they'll go back to being a persecutor.
Mhm.
Um, so a lot of it is what is your internal dynamics? And this is why most people, when it comes to being fully present or having conscious awareness, is they've not developed a witness of themselves to sit back and say, oh, this is one of those moments where I'm going to fall into this trap. And I have to be consciously aware. Do I want to do that anymore? Now, first time you try it, the persecutor comes down. You didn't do your role, so I'm going to kill you.
Right.
And that becomes a real issue.
We're
So part of it is not to get hooked into it and hooked into staying in the dynamic. So it's about witnessing it and saying, as this feels familiar. It's almost like this is what we do all the time. And you can ask the person, are you interested in doing something different? And if they get defensive, then they're not generally interested in something different.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not a one and done. It's like after you plant the seeds, sit back and wait a little bit, and they frequently, if it's not been satisfying to one, it's not satisfying to both or more. And somebody says, well, what are the choices? How do we learn that? How do we see what we're doing? So years ago, I was working with a group of executives, and they were all spontaneous personalities. They got excited over the spontaneity and the creativity, and uh, and they brought me in because they weren't able to get anything done. They had fun at their meetings, but they never got down to the structure of what is a solution, and So I told him, I says, if you're going to have to witness yourself, and I said the way I would describe this is you're all playing pinball.
Mhm.
But it's all at one time. You're all at bat, bouncing the ball, and you got the lights flashing all over the place, and everybody's excited. And then when time runs out, you don't have a choice. You didn't come to a conclusion. So as a team, your responsibility is if any one person says pinball, we have to stop, refocus ourselves, and say, okay, that was fun. And our agenda says we have to do this, this, and this. And within 5 minutes, make a decision.
Mhm.
Fully change their effectiveness.
Sure.
So either fun just because of the personality types that they are, but they also got focused and realized, okay, and we can do this other thing. And that's witnessing.
Mhm.
When we shift uh, and are witnessing ourselves and feel like we can step out of the drama triangle, we can move to the coach, creator, challenger, um, is because we've witnessed the other and we've learned how to use possibility thinking and into the situation. So if I'm coaching somebody, I frequently, whether it's any of those roles, are you interested? Are you willing to change?
Mhm.
Is there something you're not willing to do? And you create the sideboard, so to speak, of where the work is, because you don't want it if without sideboards, without a structure of containment, it's almost impossible to find out what is the issue because it's like ping pong, they're bouncing all over the place, or it's like pinball, they're bouncing, hitting the flashing lights all the time.
Okay.
So it's all of these are just interesting to me because I've studied both of David and Cartman's theories, watching it in executives meetings frequently. Um, and it's based on prior success is why it's repetitive.
Right. Yeah.
And so you change the rules of what is successful, and then they have the opportunity to witness themselves.
Right. One of the things that I like about this is that my first foray into this dynamic was within my own family, and one of the things that is asserted is that if, let's say, it's the two of us and we have a victim rescuer dynamic that is well established, and one day you decide that you want to do something differently and change those rules, or let's say change the nature of our relationship or that dynamic. One of the things that I think is really powerful about this is that you don't need my agreement in order to shift that dynamic inside of our relationship, as long as we are both committed to staying in the relationship.
Yeah.
So if I'm wham, victim, 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 and I'm used to Herb stepping in and, getting my milk money back from the bully or whatever, and then one day you just decide, I'm not going to do that anymore, without consulting me, that if I want to maintain relationship with you and you are steadfast in no longer showing up as the rescuer, then in order to stay close to you in a relationship, I've got to show up differently too.
No
Um,
question. That's why relationships end.
yeah,
If both parties are not able to shift, that's why we call it growing apart. But that's why a lot of marriages we all give excuses. Say, well, somebody had an affair and did all this other stuff. We grew apart. We did not do what you said, stay engaged. We did not shift the rules of engagement to let's get out of the drama triangle. Let's not
right.
repeat our family dynamics. You have to have a desire to witness each other and get out of blame and shame. And that comes down to is what do I want or what am I not getting?
Those both sound really hard, like really hard questions. Like my understanding of what it is that I want as a human being is that can be a really difficult question to answer, um, for a number of reasons. One of which is if I get clear about what it is that I want, then I risk knowing that I'm not getting it. And I would rather stay in the ambiguity than gain clarity that X, Y, or Z is no longer an option for me.
Well, there's the second part to that is once you have clarity, then you also face the other side. Uh, What am I willing to do to get it? Which is another way of saying is what's it going to cost me?
Right.
The
Yeah.
cost is usually an emotional cost. I'm not willing to go through the pain that's going to erupt if I change the rules because they're going to go into rage or something like that. It's so cost is always factored
Right.
and it's implicit to the story we tell ourselves because we're always managing it. Because the human experience, generally speaking, has been difficult. Buddhists like to refer to it as we were born to suffer. Well, suffering is getting lost in our dynamics and telling stories instead of just getting very specific about what is this, not getting attached to other people's reactions, not getting attached to stories inside ourselves, just sitting down saying, what do I want or what am I not getting? What am I willing to do about it? And when we start getting, in a way, almost transactional about it, we walk through it.
Right.
So one of the ways that I had a lot of hesitancy, and I said this, I think, to you in the last couple of podcasts. One of the hesitancies I had was writing the novellas, the thoughts books, was fear.
Right.
You know, and the fear was irrational and nonsensical, and it came from my background of who am I to write a book and who am I to write a novel and when I finally got through all the bullshit about why I couldn't do it, I realized it was just pure bullshit. So just sit it down, and the world's not going to end. And if it doesn't end up being a big bestseller, who cares? The issue is, what do you want to do? And it's I want to tell this story through a series of books that as a roadmap for people who are looking for a spiritual path. So
Is it still, does your past ever reveal itself like currently while you're writing these things? Do any of the echoes, the fear-based echoes from your past ever like show up, and even if it's in some diminished fashion where you're able to go, oh, look at that, it's still there, it's just shrinking?
sure,
Or
we all have those. It's these patterns, these energies, these dynamics that we create, Memorex, whatever you want to call it, are in a way the matrix is correct. We are a series of programs, and those programs have very strong valuations. And if they had strong emotional attachment, they will activate to prevent and move us back, or to stop us. That's usually the issue. Is that's where doubt comes from. You know, you really want to do it, and 3 days later, it's like, oh, do you really want to do that? And what about this, and this? Um, and generally speaking, those are all imaginations, and some of them are real. So if you do make some of these changes, it's going to change the dynamic of your relationship. There's no question about it. Is it worth it? If it's worth it, and it's part of who you are, you will walk through whatever it is you need to do to make the changes and create, the shifts in your life. We just struggle with that because we like to settle.
so
Oh,
that's the right? Like, is that the victim showing up and deciding that I would rather settle than take this risk or take more responsibility for my own experience?
sure. So settle means I'm not going to fall into the full drama. I'm just accepting there's a certain set of roles in a drama going on, and that's okay. And it's not going to affect me personally. It's not going to harm me. I'm basically saying to me, I'm going to accept this dynamic, but I'm not going to allow it to emotionally destroy me.
Gotcha.
And when we do that, that's where you see a lot of people who've been around married for a long period of time, and you look at them and you realize they kind of like figured out how to fit the pieces together, even though if you look at it, you would assume there's some friction. But they
Right.
figured out how to diminish the friction, not allow it to fester, and you move forward. And if that doesn't work, if you just realize it's beyond square peg, round hole, one or the other will leave the relationship.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
happens. That happens with executives all the time and in organizations as well. You bring in some new people and it creates frictions immediately. And the question is how do they work with the frictions? The tension's natural, but if you use the tension as a creative energy, you can create a co-leadership model that's unbelievable. Uh, but if you can't, you don't use the tensions for creative resolution and let's just say acceptance of each other. Um, it's when you get undermining and politicizing and trying to run somebody else out the door.
Well,
So it's kind of crazy. Well, listen, we've gone quite long, so keep telling me keep them shorter.
yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
gonna why don't we call this one? And so I'm Herb Stevenson. I appreciate your listening to our podcast.
Yeah. My name's Ken Chapin. I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ken. Known you for a long time. I appreciate you. So please take care. Be well, folks, and we will see you at the next one. Take care. Bye bye.